Long before Bitcoin, before Wall Street, before the first central bank was even conceived, there was a mark. Two Greek letters, Chi and Rho, the first letters of the word Christos, meaning the anointed one. Together they form the Chi-Rho, one of the earliest known Christograms, the symbol carried by Constantine's armies, engraved on the shields of emperors, and inscribed across Europe as a seal of divine order. But what if that mark wasn't just spiritual? What if it was technological? A cipher of light inscribed thousands of years ago, and an ancient signal for a coming system of value.
But I had a dream, and I saw an X and then P.
A system that could either liberate us or potentially capture us. The significance of Chi-Rho and the fate of humanity will return later in this story. But first, we must travel back to where the legacy banking families first left their mark, how they established power in the first place, and where they've distributed their resources into the modern day.
There's a very profound something that's going to be worth investing in. It's the time for the release of this new source of energy.
Welcome to the show. Part 1, the Ripple and XRP genesis, if you will. Very layered. We're going to go back in time to the foundation, heavy-hitting banking families to kick things off. We have the formative investors and network associations in Ripple. We're going to tackle the planted resources in modern day from the banking cartel and their ties to Ripple. This first part is really about understanding why they have constructed the system how it is, and the key hidden puzzle pieces that are very much active in modern day that tie directly to Ripple. But to understand all that, we must go back to the beginning. So let's do it. Let's dive into the master board and let's look at the paper trail, as it were. The heavy-hitting families post Federal Reserve Jekyll Island meeting in 1913 really inscribed what we now know today as central banking, with your ECB, IMF, BIS, World Bank, Federal Reserve. This all started to come out over the following sort of 60 years after the Federal Reserve was founded. We had the Rothschilds as the most prominent figures in the assembly of this syndicated banking model. And a good example of this is this gentleman here, Eugene Meyer. He was the first appointee and CEO or chair at World Bank. And these are the types of effects you'll start to see as we go through this board. This guy, technically independent to the Rothschilds, but worked closely with him and collaboratively with him in industrial syndicates. And we know that because of his ties with the Rothschilds and the Morgans and, the Rockefellers, this gentleman was installed as the president of the World Bank in 1946, post-World War II. This then sort of flows into all these other critical figures that we're not going to go into too much detail in because it's not really necessary. But these, if you will, are all the figures in the Syndicate, as I like to call it. So these are all the richest people of the time. You got the John Maynard Keynes, you've got Harry Dexter White, you've got the Warburgs, you've got Montague Norman, you've got Jean Monnet, and then you got more modern day figures that I've put in here. So he was the modern 15 years ago World Bank president. We know at the BIS we had Augustine Carstens and the current head of the BIS, the new one here. So the reason I silo these guys off is because these are sort of the mafiosos, if you will, the ones that operate on the side and collaboratively with the banking families to ensure the agenda is achieved. Now, what does agenda achieved look like? As we've discussed, these three big boys consolidated their wealth and their leveraging of the syndicate to ensure that their agenda was carried throughout modern day central banking and ideally preserved over time into these five main systems. So the first real important thing to understand in this documentation and this board is that we often look, most people don't even look at the central banks, to be honest. So if it's your first time trying to understand the hierarchy of order, you're playing around with government mostly. People have their eyes fixed on Donald Trump or Albanese or whoever leads your country. That's all just cannon fodder, useless. That's not where your eyes should be. The layer above that would be the central banks. So, what are the Fed doing? BIS, European Central Bank. What are these on screen doing to potentially give us clues into future events? A good example of this right now has been the massive gold accumulation from central banks the last couple of years, which I've talked extensively about. And then above that, you have the families. Now, these guys, obviously, two of them have passed on. And the Rothschilds, these are multi-generational families, right? But their legacy carries on. And we're going to get into exactly where in a second. These guys are above the central banks. So we need to go, well, okay, we can look at the central banks and be fixated on that. There's actually a lot of data we can use to track that. What are the families doing? And what have they done in history? More difficult to track. So what I've tried to do in this first part is to consolidate what the families have done. So we're right at the top of the pyramid. And what they do is consolidate their power and fiscal policy in what I call elite economic amalgams. Now, elite economic amalgams, popular one that we hear all too much about is the World Economic Forum. We have the Bretton Woods Committee, which has been was funded actually by the Rockefellers in preserving that kind of Bretton Woods ideology of a collaborative, efficient, global monetary oversight board, essentially. Group of 30, Rockefeller funded as well. One that's not often looked at, but is extremely important. We're going to get into that shortly. We have the Trilateral Commission. You may or may not have heard of it. Very important as well. We have the IIF, the Institute of International Finance. And then we have the Bilderberg Group, also very important. Planning for the New World Order since 1954. So these, to me, in my research, they form the foundation of these families' wealth preservation and influence into the future. So through these, we can start to establish the clues to paint the broader narrative. The broader narrative is massive, and we're going to go into the Ripple funding rounds shortly, and all of the backers, and that will start to really stitch everything together for you. But first and foremost, I just want to look at exactly who we have in these economic amalgams before we then jump back to the Ripple timeline. That's how we're going to do this. And worth noting, this part will just be Genesis. Future parts will tie into, second part will tie in the intelligence aspect, of which there are some mind-blowing finds and smoking guns. And then the third part ties in the XRP lore and, of course, the end game. Bang. Yes, the end game. And how I think it actually liberates us in the end. Because whether these guys like it or not, they can't stop us from holding XRP. So we will fulfill God's will and God's mission. That is my firm belief. The anecdotal evidence is off the charts for that happening. So let's go into the amalgams. The findings are pretty crazy. And I want to point out that, of course, assumed knowledge for the people that haven't seen it, but most people should have this in their sort of banquet of knowledge. It's just to gloss over real quick. Every single central banking conglomerate has got documents that reference XRP and Ripple. So good old Smoke Doggy, he's the best at tracking all these nuggets. You can go check him out. But I've just whacked them in here. I've seen them all for myself. There's some individual ones here outside of Smokey, World Bank. You got the Fed. You got the BIS. You've got all these documents. You can't argue with it. Go do your own research, but we know they're all referencing this technology. So great. We need to now know the installments that are going to carry this out. So first one, easy. World Economic Forum, very obvious, popular. BlackRock, we know there's Finky's gone over there recently. Ripple's ties to BlackRock are undeniable through, for instance, Ondo, the management of treasuries through the Ondo tokenized fund. I've done a video on that in the past. We know the BlackRock ETF will eventually come. Brad and Chris are listed on the WEF sites. There you go. They're very excited to share that BlackRock's Build and VanEck V-Build tokenized fund. There's lots of links. So that'll all play out soon. That's an obvious and simple one. Where it gets quite interesting is when we move into these different committees. You'll notice that these critical people all have had roles or are linked to banks that have a direct investment in Ripple or a partnership with Ripple. So, for instance, the Bretton Woods Committee, this guy has been involved in Standard Charter. Standard Charter, of course, we'll get into this later, but a massive, massive investor, repeat investor in Ripple in the Series B and Series C rounds. So, interesting installment. Westpac, Aussie, Bank of America, links all through here. So this one, to me, not like a smoking gun, but solid, you could say indirect links all throughout the Bretton Woods Committee. You can go many layers deeper as well. The Bretton Woods Committee have clear documentation on, how stable coins, they did this 2 years ago, are going to change the game. There's very strong insinuations within there as to how Ripple's technology will completely change cross-border value transfer. Whilst not explicitly referenced, there are some insinuations that can be made. Group of 30, big deal, this one. So funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. On the Group of 30, this is probably one of my favorite think tanks because you've got two important figures. You've got Raghuram Rajan, who is the chair of Group of 30. This guy is on the Ripple USD advisory board. So he's directly tied to Ripple in an active way. He is also speaking at Ripple Swell this year. Go figure. You then have the former chair, Mark Carney, now the Prime Minister of Canada, former governor of Bank of England, who piloted with Ripple in 2017 and tested the protocol extensively and is a massive, massive advocate for this technology. So no coincidence that he's been moved into power right when they need him. Former Group of 30 chair. Go figure. So that one's really interesting for me, the Group of 30. These are just highlights, by the way. It's going to get a whole lot crazier. Trilateral Commission, again, some really interesting links to Santander and Bank of America. We know that Santander are also a big funder in Ripple. Listed partner, actually, not under NDA. We just know that. So we've got that link there, which shows us that there's interests parked at these amalgams that have direct ties to preserving the interests of Ripple, if you will. So this is important. You've got Bank of America. We know through the patents that there has been collaborative efforts behind the scenes to install this technology. You cannot deny that. So this is quite interesting as well. Again, preservation within that space. And then there's a litany of other crossover links, but not direct and powerful, but indirect. And then you have this one, which is a little sneak peek at the next part of intelligence. We have Anna Boten, Santander rep, definitely understands Ripple. She is also on the Bilderberg steering committee, alongside Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, and remember this Wallenberg name, because we're going to come back to Wallenberg later on. Wild. And the link there does go directly into intelligence. This will be in part 2 with Thiel, his secret organization no one knows about. That will be covered. But this Boten figure, interesting, crazy link to the Bilderbergs, Santander, and we know the importance of this because of why? One, Thiel is important because of the Founders Fund. Where are we? The Founders Fund injection. So we've got Founders Fund came in the venture seed round. Founders Fund invested. We have the documentation here. Big name investors back effort to build a better Bitcoin. This was in 2013. We have clear ties of Brad Garlinghouse as well, who at Thiel's secret organization called Dialogue, which is like the tech Bilderberg think tank. Brad Garlinghouse was with Peter Thiel at one of the inaugural Dialogue sessions. More on that next time, but gives you the insight into this clear ripple effect into modern day from these amalgams. These amalgams are imperative to understand because they really do dictate collaboratively the fiscal direction. Oh, and I almost forgot, probably one of the most important parts of the economic amalgams is the insane crossover with all of these banks and figures that are on the Ripple Payments Steering Group. So founding members, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, Santander, UniCredit, Standard Chartered, Westpac Banking Corporation, Royal Bank of Canada, and MUFG Bank of Tokyo. So as I glossed over, I neglected to mention this, but as you can see here, you know, you Gail Kelly, Westpac publicly noted with Ripple, Global Payments Steering Group, bang. We know Standard Chartered on there. We have under here in the Trilateral Commission a litany, as I said, of indirects that have affiliations with the Global Payments Steering Group. Paramount. Again, this kind of notion of guiding and entrenching themselves with the future fiscal policy and guardrails that we know are coming. And the final thing is the UN. Probably not really, I guess, you could call them an economic amalgam, but pretty commonly known. Great work here done by our man, not financial advice, Crypto. He's done a lot on this. The UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So, fun fact, SDGs were adopted unanimously by all 193 UN member states in 2015. You know, transforming our world for the 2030 agenda. Now, these SDGs heavily include blockchain for a sustainable world. Look at the litany of references here. Blockchain for transformation. Why not cryptocurrencies to fund SDGs? Digital financial inclusion, digital technologies to achieve the UN SDGs. All of the references to making sure they're a part of it. This is the general timeline. As you can see how it's all evolved. We've got clear references back as early as 2010 to 2012 with the World Bank mentioning electronic payment policies. And of course, XRP is created shortly thereafter. The interesting thing here with the SDGs is the uniform endorsement. Admittedly, people will go, oh, well, the US pulled out, Trump hates the UN. Yeah, I think it could be a diversion tactic. That still has to play out. But let's just look at the facts. So, for instance, we know Bill Gates heavily entrenched in this. Gates, by the way, I think is, demonic. But he predicted where we were heading a long time ago. He poured in a truck ton of cash into the global goals. So global goals this is just the SDGs. You can see it in the iconography here. Then very shortly after 2018, Bill Gates using cryptocurrency Ripple to fight global poverty. Gates Foundation partners with former Ripple CTO's blockchain project. Ripple joins Moja Loop Foundation in push to bring financial services to 1.7 billion unbanked. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation going forward with Ripple for pro-poor payments. Bill Melinda Gates Foundation to launch underbanked service with Dwolla, Ripple, and others. And this kind of all seemingly just falls under the radar. Moja Loop, big Ripple partner. There's your kind of link back to Gatesy. You've got this SDGs, strange UN language programming with ripples of change. Are you ready to start a Ripple? Turning point, ripples of change, durable. It's just a lot of strange language choices. And then all the while on the surface, you actually have Gates slamming crypto. So it's a divert attention tactic, in my opinion. Why? Go figure. But the embroilment within this also shows the calculated multi-layer 5D chess that they play. They're at every single table. Very important to note before we move into the next segment of this breakdown. So again, we go to these families, they're above, but who sort of represents them? It's this down here. So this is really important to lock in on because it now starts to make sense as we move into the Ripple tree and the people behind Ripple and XRP. Important to note. So all these, you've got all these central banks. The BIS comes out 1930. They all come out after really important global events. We'll leave that there. Most people think that the Rothschilds invented syndicated banking, but your first little cherry is that it wasn't invented by Rothschilds. It was actually run and invented by the Fugger family. So the Fuggers, lo and behold, yes, potentially linked, I won't say concrete, but it is pretty suspect, to the modern day Ryan Fugger who invented Ripple Pay in 2004. What are the odds? So this Fugger family were extremely wealthy. I won't say richest ever because people go, oh no, it was Mansa Musa, the gold man. That's fine. They were very, very wealthy and they invented syndicated banking. So they had their grips on the precious metals of the time and extended loans to Habsburgs, silver and copper mines, the security, and they kind of created what we would know today as banking. And they pretty much created a monopoly across Central Europe. The cash flow funds repeated sovereign loans to the Habsburgs, and this continued on for a fairly long while. On the back of these flows, the fuggers standardized multi-bank syndication, collateral-backed sovereign lending, and pan-European distribution of credit techniques later replicated and scaled in the 19th century by Rothschild housing issuing cross-border bonds. The Rothschild archive is explicit that the sovereign bond issuance was the core of their 19th century business. So, pretty strange that we have this link back to the fuggers. And this is where we sort of begin with feeding the Genesis narrative tightly into Ripple. So before we get to Ripple Pay, we're going to just touch on the history that we know. So we know that Schwartzy was the first person within the modern day community to have something to do with cryptography, filed as a patent. Patent was approved in 91, actually on my birthday, ironically. And we have it filed in 1988. So we're going back a fair way here, right? We have in this very same year is when the Phoenix Economist magazine, the famous one we all know about, has the little stellar logo there. We have the Phoenix rising from the ashes. The Phoenix with the emblem on top, weirdly, is the exact same emblem as the Fugger family house crest, which was found on their Phoenix coins. So the Fugger coins had the Phoenix on it with the same crest. Call it coincidence, call it what you want. It's pretty strange. So make of it what you will, but that's where we start. We then sort of get this idea of Ripple as early as 1991 through Ripple Communications. And this is something that was strange because in the very next year, XRP appears in this movie Sneakers, where they're cracking into the Federal Reserve transfer node, and you clearly see XRP on the computer screen. Like, what are the odds of that? Call it predictive programming, call it God putting little nuggets out for us to see. Make of it what you will, but it's pretty strange that that's there. In 1991, we also had Bitcoin pop up within a video game. Again, predictive programming, strange, with the all-seeing eye. Odd. The Ripple Communications is going to be a big part of our intelligence part, which will be next in the next part. Reason being, Ito let the cat out of the bag on this one a while ago, proving that Ripple, modern-day Ripple, particularly when Jed McCaleb and the crew founded OpenCoin, did actually have ownership on the trademark to that domain. And we do know concretely now through this Karen Nussel, who is linked to this Ripple Communications, still is the CEO of Ripple Communications today. We have a massive paper trail that leads the Nussels into the intelligence community and through the Aspen Institute. We're going to get to that intelligence. So you're starting to see the little nuggets that feed off that will paint the full picture. But we're not going to go into that one in this part. That will be for next time. So as we truck along, we sort of get to this 1996 mark. We then see the theoretical paper on electronic cash and how to make it in 1996 by the NSA. So the NSA published this. I've done videos on this in the past. Very, very strange that this was published then and that the NSA were already ideating something very similar to Bitcoin. We know Schwartzy worked at the NSA. It's listed in his bio on Ripple's website. We have commentary from Schwartzy. That's not a terrible theory. If the NSA or the CIA happened to stumble on how to make Bitcoin, it might make sense that they would implement and deploy it to eliminate the risk that someone hostile to the US would do it first and potentially made billions of dollars. Who knows, but it is very, very strange, and the ties to intelligence will only get stronger as we go forward. So Back to this 04 region, of course, Ryan Fugger's come out with this blueprint for the liberation of financial control, I guess, from financial control. And that's when the interest starts to pick up. We have a 2011 is sort of, there's this gap, right? This 7-year gap. We've got Brad over working with AOL and Yahoo at this time. We have projects like the Phoenix that we've seen him referenced with. This is a bit later, but still strange. And then we get to 2011, and this is when OpenCoin is founded. They obviously buy out, or I don't know exactly what the arrangement was with Fugger, but there's a acquisition there. And we have the angel investors who pour cash into OpenCoin. And this is important. So one of the first ones is Jesse Powell. He's the founder of Kraken Exchange. He put in about 200 grand. I mean, it's speculative. We don't know exactly how much he put in. He'd help Jed McCaleb, co-founder, with Mt. Gox, which Jed McCaleb had founded. Big figure in Bitcoin. And yeah, we know, just I want to give you some context. These people, so these early guys, you go to their Twitters, they don't give you much coverage on Ripple. So they don't talk about XRP, they don't talk about Ripple. I find it quite odd. I mean, it makes sense. They're just keep it low key, don't want to be drawn to it, don't want to be tied to it. But yeah. So we then have Roger Ver, nicknamed Bitcoin Jesus. Very interesting cat. We know recently that he has flip-flopped massively. He thinks Bitcoin's been hijacked and turned into a financial trap. He was linked to the massive Bitcoin transaction on Independence Day this year. He's spoken with Tucker Carlson to this effect. He's still hiding from a massive tax infringement in the US as well. He states, I'm embarrassed to promote Bitcoin to people for all the reasons that we know. Transaction slow, expensive, unreliable, and you have no privacy. Look, I'm not here to rag on Bitcoin. I'm here to show you the facts and what I know and what I'm showing you. And I find it strange that someone like Roger Ver it's very recently now flip-flopped on the whole Bitcoin narrative, when for so long it was all cushy, and the fact that there's no ties really in public commentary back to Ripple, when the bloke is he's the earliest investor in the company. So again, take out of that what you want. Then there was Greg Kidd, who is an angel investor. He's also chief risk officer at Ripple. Crazy background. Senior analyst at the Federal Reserve, specializing in payment systems, and worked as a consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is the mob that Ed Snowden worked for. And we will get into this next time, but yeah, Booz Allen Hamilton, crazy stuff under INSA. He has actually got 1% of the float. I don't know if he's still got his coins or how it's all set up, but you can go watch. He did an interview with a digital asset investor a number of years ago now, and it's a fascinating chat. Obviously very bullish on the long-term prospects. And you've got you've got intelligence ties, you've got work at the Federal Reserve in payments flows. So really important and interesting that that's the crew you sort of had at the start. Backed by the team as well, you had, as I said, co-founders Jed, Chris, very established in their own right. We know a lot about them. We then had Brito and Schwartzy engaged, and we know that they endeavored to build this thing for a very specific reason, and it was for global domination. This wasn't a game, and we have evidence of this. Brito has said specifically in old forum posts in 2012, looking forward, the XRP ledger needs to be able to scale to serve 7.5 billion people, plus billion people and even more devices. They didn't come in this space to wing it. They came in to win. And you can see by the team plus the investors that that's sort of where we're heading. Now, when we get to 2013, we have the rewrap to Ripple Labs. This is also the year that we had the official XRP patent filed, which is quite interesting. This is real. I've looked this up. It looks fake, but it's not fake. Quite strange. And we then start to get the big boys come in. So the venture seed round in 2013, we have Andreessen Horowitz, early VC in Facebook, Twitter, Coinbase, big boy. We know all too well. He's got his mitts on everything. Founders Fund, we just talked about it earlier. They came in, direct links to PayPal Mafia to build a better Bitcoin. And this is really important for the next part because remember, Thiel's and Musk's philosophy and a big part of their ideology is to overhaul the financial system. And we know from Thiel's speeches over the years that he himself has even conceded that he fell short. Let me pull it up here. Bear with me. It's somewhere in here. There it is. We set out to change the way money moves, but we failed. PayPal. They did. They failed. They couldn't bust through what Ripple's about to bust through. You know, regulatorily wise and all the hoops that had to be jumped through was still 20 odd years away when they ended up moving on from PayPal. But it's been an itch that they both want to scratch. We 100% know this. We know it in detail because, for instance, the journalist Jimmy Sunny, who wrote The Founders, had massive, very long interviews with a lot of the PayPal Mafia members. And we have a reference from that book clearly stating that Musk wants to change the financial system. We have him saying here, this is a couple of years ago, if done right, X could become half of the global financial system. We know that one of their setbacks at X have been the money transmitter licenses. The one company that solves that for them is Ripple. So I think once regulations are in, we're going to see something big happen with X. It's probably going to be XLM and XRP and the stablecoins. It'll be all encompassing, but it's going to be big. So bear that in mind. Philosophically, these guys have wanted a slice of this pie since the beginning. They couldn't do it on their own, and now it's go time, and they've got their investments in the right place. So that's a little sidetrack. That's going to feed into the next part as well. But important to keep in the back of the mind. We also had Lightspeed Ventures come in, Vast Ventures, Bitcoin Opportunity Fund, Google, IDG Partners. So this is a group of people and companies that aren't backing donkeys. So for all the people that sort of go, oh, you know, XRP and Ripple, they're just a fraud, they're a scam, they're a Ponzi, they dump on investors every month, and it's all, let's be real. So from the start, it was backed for a very specific reason. I'm not even going to go into all the partnerships that have recently been announced. I've done stories and videos on them on Instagram. If you can't see the value in raising money for a $1 billion XRP treasury company, if you can't see the acquisition of G Treasury, and you can't see the ETFs coming, if you can't see the value of all these things, Hidden Road, Rail, the stablecoin provider, this is just this year. I'm just rattling off just this year. You're blind. Simple as that. You're blind. So important. We've gone through that. We're now looking at sort of post this venture seed round team building. We're going to look at a couple of highlights. So 15, 16, we get this Gene B. Sperling, former senior advisor to the president. former director of US National Economic Council under Clinton and Obama, joined Ripple's board. Susan Atty has said many bullish things in the past. Stanford economist, ex-Microsoft chief economist, advisor, and on the board. We've got Ken Kersen, Lee Fang, and our boy Greg Kidd as well. So they build this team, they buff it out after the venture seed, and then they go into the Series A round, which is where it gets very interesting. I'll go through the highlights. First and foremost, CME Group. CME Group. The world's largest derivative exchange, strategic bet on blockchain for settlement. CME Group. So it's, wild. They're not going to be backing something that's not going to be settling the back end of the stock market. They just wouldn't. We know that that's what Ripple will be doing. We've got the DTCC patents to prove it. And it's right there in front of your face that they backed it. Seagate Technology, global data storage giant, AME Cloud Ventures, Jerry Yang. So important here. Jerry Yang loved Brad Garlinghouse when he was at Yahoo. It's fair to assume that there was probably an ongoing relationship there where he said, if Brad comes across, because we know Brad came across in 2016, I believe, he'd invest, which is what happened. China Rock Capital Management, China Growth Capital, Wicklow Capital, Core Innovation Capital, Route 66, RRE Ventures. That was the Disney link. Interesting. James D. Robinson, former CEO of Amex, did a little story on that a little while ago, but pretty wild. Vast Ventures and Venture 51. So this was pretty impressive. This is back in 2015. Heavy hitting stuff to bolster the already all-star venture seed contributors. And then things really heat up when we get into 2016. So not long after, we go into a $55 million raise, there or thereabouts, and we get the big boys on board. So this is when SBI Holdings comes in. We have SBI acquiring 9% of Ripple shares. Massive, absolutely massive. They've been the most bullish on XRP and Ripple in Japan for ages. We've heard all this stuff. We've got Yoshitaka Kitao. So he's the CEO of SBI Group. Every bank in Japan will use Ripple's XRP by 2025. Yoshitaka, we're running out of time, mate, but I believe you, maybe 2026. We then have Tomoyo Asakura, who runs the asset management arm. He has publicly bullish. This is not just another crypto. This is the wealth transfer of our generation. So pretty wild stuff there from SBI. We now, just this week or last week, Evernorth to go public with over $1 billion in gross proceeds. So the guy doing this used to work for Ripple. Picks the perfect time. In the past, he said, back in 2019 when he was there, he's like, we need legal clarity. Took a lot longer than he expected. And now here we are. He's raising the funds. SBI are chucking in cash into this. Chris Larson has chucked in. He's not dumping on our ass, as everyone says. He's throwing in XRP into this, 50 mil worth. And we have Brad, I think, as well, throwing some in. So very, very bullish. Good stuff. We then had Santander. So they came in as an investor. We know they're partners, but not sure if everyone knew that they were investors as well. SC Ventures also big investors. CME Group came in again. Seagate came in. We had lots of additional contributors from prior rounds. So great stuff to see. Now this ties into the earlier part of the discovery piece. You now start to piece it together. We have these tentacles from these institutions feed into the elite economic amalgams, which ultimately, as we've talked about, preserves the foundational wealth and ushers it into the new ecosystem. It's a lot to absorb, but that's the crux of the history. There was a Series C round as well, which was bigger. Lots of recontributions from these guys. It didn't change all too much. That's why I wanted to just hone in on this. But what you start to see is that this web all leads to Ripple, and the foundations are perhaps one of the strongest foundations you could possibly see in any company that's trying to disrupt an existing ecosystem. They haven't set up to fail. They have set up to win. And when you start to unpack the intelligence, which we will do in part 2, and the links to these agencies, you very quickly realize that this technology was selected from the start to win when the time is right. The further point to this is, well, is it going to entrap humanity or is it going to liberate? I believe it will liberate, and we will get to that in part 3. But we aren't there just yet. But what I know and what I feel is that this vast, vast network only leads to one destination for Ripple and XRP. Thank you so much for listening to part 1 and being with me. A lot of this will get even wilder and more fleshed out in part 2 and part 3. This is really just to whet your appetite. But I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, share. I will also upload this to Rumble in case it gets taken down. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in part 2.